Welcome to Dead Souls Social Club.
This audio presentation contains graphic details of death, violence, and controversial subject matter. Listener discretion is strongly advised. From Dead Souls Media, this is God. I'm Jamie Black, a researcher and psychologist, and I'll be your host for tonight. The quote, "death of God," was a phrase which was popularized by the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche back in 1882. Nietzsche used the phrase to describe the decline of traditional religion as the foundation for meaning, morality, and values in our modern-day society. While several philosophers of note since Nietzsche have used the phrase "God is dead" to reflect the increase in disbelief of God or religion, the concept rose to peak prominence in the late 1950s and 1960s. In fact, the cover of the April 8, 1966 edition of the Time magazine famously asked the question, quote, "Is God dead?" The accompanying article in the magazine addressed growing atheism within the United States of America at the time. So, some statistics. Christianity, the largest religion in the United States, experienced a high in popularity in 1976, with 91% of the total population identifying as Christians. But by 2022, this number was just 64%. In a 2021 census of the United Kingdom, 46.2% of the population identified as Christian. That's less than half of the country for the first time ever. A drop of more than 10% from the highest UK figure ever recorded at 59.4% in 2011. It's a similar outlook for Canada, whereby in 2021, Statistics Canada found that only 68% of Canadians were Christian, marking the first time the number had dropped below 70% ever. Christianity remains the largest religion in Canada, where now, today, just 53.3% of the population identifies Christians. Similarly, in Australia, the percentage of people belonging to some form of Christianity decreased from 52.2% in 2016 to just 43.9% by the 2021 census. I'm referencing Christianity as the primary religion here because, well, I'm discussing it from a Western viewpoint, as that's, well, what I know and where I'm currently sitting. The numbers are similar across Europe too. 48% of the German population identify as Christians. Around 50% of French respondents identified as Christians. 55.6% of Spaniards self-identify as Christians in the 2023 census. And in Italy, around 68% of participants in 2023 identified as Christians. The Netherlands found that Christians comprised 43.8% of their total population. And finally, the highest out of all Western nations was the Republic of Ireland, where 75.7% of the population self-identify as Christian. So what? Well, a few days ago I received a message from my friend Elliot. He reached out after listening to our recent Patreon episode about artificial intelligence. Part of his message asked, quote, "If my memory serves me correct, I thought you considered yourself an atheist. Or is it more that you don't believe in organized religion? Either way, in the particular part of the episode where the conversation with ChatGPT went into a very spiritual direction, my question is, do you hold any stock in the prophecy of an Antichrist?" For those of you who are not subscribed to our Patreon, or have not yet listened to the AI episode over there, what Elliot is referring to was an example of a conversation that Lynn Bertram, a systems developer from San Francisco, had recorded himself having with the latest ChatGPT conversation model. I included the conversation in the episode as I found it both strange and uniquely terrifying, particularly the direction which the chat quickly took. Elliot was entirely right with his observation. The AI model did get very spiritual, and with little to no prompt, it wasn't long before it began talking about the arrival of the Antichrist. Religious, sure, but specifically Western Abrahamic in viewpoint. But I'm not here to discuss the AI's comments. More so, Eliot's questions about spiritual matters and my views on God and organised religion. So to be blunt, this is why God doesn't exist. Now, to be clear, this is not an attack on any specific religion. It's not an attack on any followers of a specific religion, and not an attack on any particular religious viewpoint. I firmly believe in freedom of religion for all, freedom of speech, and that everybody, no matter who they are, should be allowed freedom of their own thoughts, ideas, will, and perspective. This, to be as transparent as possible, is my personal viewpoint and my particular thoughts and feelings about the existence of a God. My goal here is not to mock for the sake of mockery, but to subject the most monumental claim in human history, the existence of an all-powerful, all-knowing God, to the same rigorous scrutiny we would apply to any other extraordinary idea or claim. I'll use logic, the lens of science, and the unflinching gaze of reason to look directly at the sun, even if we've been told our whole lives that doing so will make us blind. So let's start at the beginning. We are going to construct, piece by piece, the foundational case for why a rational mind, when presented with all the available evidence, should find the existence of God to be a highly improbable, if not impossible, proposition. A blind fallacy of the masses, if you will. So let's examine the truth that religion won't tell you. The problem of evil in a universe indifferent to suffering. Because if we're going to talk about God, then we must talk about suffering. Because if there is a single glaring, insurmountable piece of existence against the existence of a benevolent creator, it's the sheer scale of suffering in our world. This isn't just a philosophical puzzle box. It's a brutal, lived reality. It is the baby born with Tay-Sachs disease whose nervous system will degenerate, leading to a slow, agonizing and inevitable death before the age of 4. It is the gazelle torn apart, still alive, by a pack of wild dogs. It is the millions lost to the Black Death, the tens of thousands swallowed by a single tsunami, the silent, anonymous agony of a creature starving to death in a forest that we will never see. This is the problem of evil, and it is perhaps the oldest and most powerful argument against theism. The classic formulation that attributed to the Greek philosopher Epicurus is devastatingly simple. It goes something like this. If God is omnibenevolent, that is, someone who is all good and loving, he must want to prevent evil and suffering. If God is omnipotent, that is, all-powerful, he must be able to prevent evil and suffering. And if God is omniscient, ergo someone who is all-knowing, he must know about all instances of evil and suffering and know how to prevent them. And yet, evil and suffering exist in the world. They are not rare, occasional occurrences. They happen daily, minute by minute, all across the globe. They are woven into the very fabric of biological existence. Therefore, one of the premises here must be entirely false. Either God does not want to prevent evil, in which case he is not all good, or he is not able to prevent evil, in which case he is not all powerful. Or finally, he doesn't know about it, in which case he is not all knowing. Or most logically, a being with all three of these properties simply does not exist. Because for centuries, theologians and apologists have laboured to create defences known as theodicies, which they use to, for lack of a better phrase, wriggle out of this seemingly airtight logical trap. So let's examine the most common of these defences and see how they hold up under pressure. The most popular defence, by a wide margin, is the argument from free will. The story goes that God, in all of his wisdom, gifted humanity with the freedom to choose between good and evil. The suffering we see in the world, therefore, is not God's fault. It's our fault. Mankind's doing. It's the price of our freedom. Without the possibility of choosing evil, our choice to do good would be meaningless. On the surface, this sounds entirely plausible, almost noble, but when you begin to take a deeper look at it, the entire structure collapses. Because first, and most obviously, the free will defense only addresses one specific category of evil, and that's moral evil, the suffering that humans inflict upon one another. It has absolutely nothing to say about the immense category of natural evil, whose free will was exercised when, for example, the Lisbon earthquake of 1755 killed up to 50,000 people, many of whom were crushed in churches on All Saints' Day. Did the tectonic plates choose to shift and conduct this evil? Whose moral failing is represented by childhood leukemia, by Parkinson's disease, by a parasite that burrows into a child's eye and causes blindness? To blame these horrors on Adam and Eve's dietary choices in a mythical garden, as some fundamentalists may do, is not a serious answer. It's a desperate retreat into mythology to avoid confronting a terrifying reality, that the vast majority of suffering on this planet has nothing to do with human choice. Secondly, the argument creates a paradox when we consider the concept of heaven. Because most religious doctrines promise a heaven where believers will live in eternal bliss, free from suffering and evil. So presumably the inhabitants of heaven still possess free will, however. Because if they don't, then heaven is not a paradise of free beings, but a celestial prison of mindless, pre-programmed automatons. But if they do have free will in heaven, and yet there is no evil or suffering, then it proves that it is entirely possible for God to create a state of existence where free will and the absence of evil coexist. And if that's possible to create a state in heaven, why not create it here on earth? The only logical conclusion is that God could have made a world without suffering, without evil, but he chose not to. This brings us back to the original problem. A being who willingly chooses to create a world filled with pointless agony cannot be called all good. But life is a test of your character and moral compass. How you perform in life will decide how you proceed into the afterlife, believers will say. But this is utter horseshit. Because if a God wanted to create a paradise with only good people in it, why bother with the Krypton factor of life? Just create good people to put in your good paradise. Just don't create evil or suffering in the first place, or the choice to go off your moral track. Third, is the very nature of this free will is entirely questionable. It presents a false dichotomy, either robotic predetermination or a freedom that necessitates the possibility of committing the most heinous acts imaginable. Could an all-powerful being not have created humans with a nature that, while free, was strongly inclined towards empathy and goodness, rather than evil? We do it ourselves in a clumsy biological way. Most people are born with an innate sense of empathy. We don't have to debate whether or not to feel sad when we see a child crying, for example. Why couldn't a perfect creator have simply nudged our moral compass a few degrees closer to compassion, making cruelty a remote and abhorrent possibility rather than a daily occurrence? To claim he couldn't is to limit his power. To claim he wouldn't is to question his goodness. Another common defense is the mysterious ways argument. This is the ultimate intellectual get-out-of-jail-free card, if you will. It posits that suffering, while it seems terrible to us, is part of a grand divine plan that our finite minds simply cannot comprehend. The pain serves a greater good that we cannot see. God acts in mysterious ways. I'm sorry, but this is not an argument. It is the abandonment of an argument, if anything. It is an appeal to ignorance. To say that God's goodness is not like our goodness, that his reasons are beyond our understanding, is to render the word good utterly meaningless. If in God's good plan it is necessary for a toddler to be tortured to death, then the word good has been stretched to include its exact opposite. It's like saying the circle is a square, but in a mysterious way you can't understand. It's utter shit. It explains everything and therefore explains nothing. Furthermore, it's a classic example of special pleading in any other context. If a father claimed that locking his child in a basement and starving him was part of a mysterious loving plan, then we would rightly call him a monster and lock him away. Yet when some logic is applied to a celestial father, it's supposed to be accepted as profound wisdom. Finally, there's the character building defense. This is the idea that suffering is necessary for our spiritual and moral development. Hardship makes us stronger, more compassionate, more resilient. But again, this argument wilts under the slightest scrutiny. While it's true that some people can emerge from hardship with newfound strength, it is equally, if not more true, that immense suffering simply breaks people. It leaves them with trauma, depression, with a shattered view of the world. It leaves them helpless. What character is being built in a person who suffers from debilitating chronic pain their entire life? Or more to the point, what possible character building lesson is learned by the infant dying of a genetic disease? The student dies before they can even comprehend the lesson. The sheer disproportion of it all is staggering. Is a tsunami that kills 100,000 people a reasonable tool for teaching the survivors a lesson in compassion? It's like using a nuclear bomb to light a candle. The method is so grotesquely out of proportion to the supposed goal that it points not to a wise teacher, but to a clumsy, indifferent, or malevolent force. When we strip away these flawed theodicies, we are left with the raw data. The universe that we observe is not one that appears to be managed by a benevolent, personal intelligence. It is a universe that functions according to impersonal, amoral, and often brutal physical and biological laws. A deer does not starve to death because it needs to learn a lesson. It starves because there is not enough food, and its metabolism requires a certain number of calories to function. Simple. A virus does not kill a child as part of a divine plan. The virus kills a child because it has evolved to replicate, and the child's body is a hospitable environment for that replication, a perfect host. The problem of evil is not just a problem. It is a resounding declaration. It is the universe screaming at us that if there is a God, it is either not powerful enough to stop the horrors, not good enough to want to, or it simply isn't there at all. The fundamental reality of existence is that life is filled with pain and the heavens remain silent. The silent heavens, the argument from divine hiddenness. Now this leads us directly to our second major line of reasoning, the argument from divine hiddenness. If the problem of evil challenges God's goodness, the argument from divine hiddenness challenges his very desire for a relationship with us. It poses a simple yet profound question. If a personal, loving God exists and desires for all of humanity to know and worship him, as egotistical as this sounds, then why does he make his existence so profoundly ambiguous? Why is he hiding? So let's consider the stakes here. According to most major monotheistic religions, particularly Christianity and Islam, belief in God is not merely a lifestyle choice or a philosophical preference. It is a matter of eternal consequence. Your everlasting soul hangs in the balance. Believing correctly leads to an eternity of bliss in heaven, while failing to believe, or believing in the wrong God, leads to an eternity of torment in hell. The stakes could not possibly be any higher. Let's use an analogy here. Imagine a loving parent who has a life-saving medicine for their child. The child is gravely sick, confused, and they don't even know the medicine exists. What would that loving parent do you think? Would they hide the medicine in a locked box buried in the backyard and leave behind a series of cryptic, contradictory and ancient clues, hoping that the child figures it out? Unlikely. That would be the act of a psychopath. A loving parent would walk directly to the child, administer the medicine clearly and unambiguously, and ensure their child is saved. If God is a loving celestial parent, and belief is the life-saving medicine, his behaviour is utterly baffling. He has chosen a method of communication that is by any objective measure catastrophically inefficient and obscure. Fire and brimstone believers, like those of the friendly and welcoming Westboro Baptist Church, may argue that God is the creator. He is all-powerful, all-vengeful, and you must do as he says or face the consequences of an eternity in anguish. Holy Christ, heaven sounds like Stockholm Syndrome for the lucky few who survived the bullshit of life. Consider the evidence typically offered for God's existence. First, there are the holy books, the Bible, the Quran, the Vedas, the Book of Mormon, and countless others. These texts are presented as the direct word or revelation of God, yet they are rife with internal contradictions, historical and scientific inaccuracies, and moral teachings that we now find abhorrent. More importantly, they are mutually exclusive. They all claim to be one true path, and they all condemn the followers of the other paths. A Christian believes the Quran is a false revelation. A Muslim believes the Bible has been corrupted. A Hindu may view them both as interesting, but ultimately misguided stories. Why would an all-knowing God, who wants to be known by everyone, reveal himself in such a fragmented, confusing and contradictory way? Why would he inspire dozens of competing true religions, ensuring that by their own logic, the vast majority of humanity is doomed from the start? It's like the CEO of a business sending out 10 completely different and contradictory mission statements to his employees, and then firing everyone who doesn't follow the real one. It's a pure strategy of failure. Now, then there is the evidence of personal experience or revelation. You know, that feeling of God's presence, the burning in the bosom, the voice heard in prayer. This is perhaps the most common reason people give for their faith and belief. And we shouldn't dismiss these experiences as fake. They are indeed very real to the people who experience them. But the problem is these feelings are not a reliable pathway to truth. A Mormon missionary, for example, feeling the Spirit confirmed that Joseph Smith was a prophet, is having a genuine emotional experience. A Muslim Sufi mystic, feeling a state of ecstatic union with Allah, is also having a genuine emotional experience. A Pentecostal Christian speaking in tongues, and a Hindu Bhakti yogi chanting in rapturous devotion to Krishna are both having genuine emotional experiences. These experiences all confirm to the believer that their specific theology is the correct one. Yet these theologies are mutually contradictory. These feelings cannot all be pointing to the objective truth. What they are evidence of is the power of the human brain, causing us to generate profound emotional and psychological states, often influenced by culture, expectation, and deep-seated emotional needs. It's evidence of human psychology, not divine communication. An all-knowing God would be aware of this. He would know that subjective feelings are a terrible way to convey objective truths. A God who truly wanted to be known would provide evidence that is public, objective, universal, and verifiable. Evidence that is available to everyone, regardless of their culture or emotional state. He could write, "I exist, I am Yahweh in the stars," in every language on earth. He could cause a mountain to levitate a few feet off the ground permanently. He could ensure that every prayer for an amputee to regrow a limb was answered. He could do any number of things that would provide clear, unambiguous proof of his existence in nature. But he does none of these things. Surely, concrete evidence of life after death, paradise in the heavens, if you lead a good life, would be more likely to guarantee that people submit and follow the scriptures, right? Instead, this God allegedly whispers in the hearts of some, provides ancient contradictory texts, and allows the natural world to operate according to physical laws that require no divine intervention whatsoever. And this brings us to a crucial point about non-belief. Theism often frames non-belief as a rebellious, prideful choice. Heresy. The atheist chooses to reject God out of arrogance or a desire to sin. But the argument from divine hiddenness shows this to be a profound mischaracterization. Because for many, if not most skeptics, non-belief is not a willful rebellion. It is the result of a sincere, honest search for truth that comes up empty-handed. It is the state of what philosopher John Schellenberg calls reasonable non-belief. When a person honestly seeks evidence for a proposition and finds none, the only rational position to hold is one of non-belief. It's human nature. It was given to us prior to birth. If there was a God, it would be Him who would have given us this. If God exists and desires a relationship with us, then there should be no such thing as reasonable non-believers. His existence should be obvious, so that to deny it would be akin to denying the existence of the sun, for example. But the fact that millions of intelligent, sincere, and morally decent people can scour the universe for evidence of God and find nothing is in itself perhaps the most powerful evidence that there is nothing to be found. The silence of the heavens, the ambiguity of the evidence, and the existence of reasonable non-belief all point to the same direction. The world does not look like a place inhabited by a God who desperately wants to be found. It looks exactly like a world with no God at all. The divine hiddenness is not a test of faith. It is a signpost for an absence. It is another critical tear in the fabric of the God illusion. Because for most of human history, God was not a philosophical concept. He was a job description. He was the celestial mechanic, the cosmic weatherman, the divine physician. Why does the sun cross the sky? Well, because God wills it. So what causes lightning and thunder and the wrath of a deity? Why do we get sick demonic influence or divine punishment? Why does life in all its spectacular diversity exist in the first place? Because God sculpted it in an act of special creation. Apparently. For millennia, God did. It was the default and frankly the only explanation for almost every phenomenon in the natural world. But then something remarkable happened. We, as in mankind, began to find better answers. Answers that were testable, predictable, and didn't require us to believe in an invisible being in the sky. Copernicus and Galileo showed that the Earth orbits the Sun, a process governed by gravity, not divine will. Benjamin Franklin demonstrated that lightning was a natural electrical discharge, not a thunderbolt from Zeus or Yahweh. Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch, with their germ theory, proved that disease was caused by microorganisms, not by sin. And most profoundly, Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace, through the theory of evolution by natural selection, provided a stunningly elegant, entirely naturalistic mechanism for the diversity of life on Earth. With each scientific breakthrough, the territory of God shrinks. He's been evicted time and time again from his previous home. He has lost the job as the sun mover, the rainmaker, the life creator. So where does the modern believer find God? Well, they find him in the shadows. They find him in the gaps of our scientific knowledge, lurking. This is the famous God of the gaps theory. The argument in its modern form goes something like this. You scientists can explain a lot, but you can't explain this. You can't explain what caused the Big Bang. You can't explain exactly how non-living chemicals first assembled into a self-replicating life form, a process called abiogenesis. You can't explain consciousness. Therefore, God must have done it, and God is in that gap. This is, to put it mildly, an argument from a position of profound weakness. It's a theology of ignorance. It turns God from a majestic creator into a cosmic lurker hiding in the ever-dwindling pockets of what we don't yet know. It's a deity on life support, sustained only by the ever-thinning air of our own ignorance. And history has shown again and again that this is a terrible place to build your faith. The gap where God resided yesterday is the subject of a Nobel Prize-winning paper tomorrow. Placing God in a gap is to sentence him to a slow, inevitable death by 1,000 more discoveries. Furthermore, it's an intellectually lazy maneuver. When a scientist encounters a gap in their knowledge, they say, "I don't know, but let's go and find out." It's a call to adventure, an impetus for investigation. The God of the Gap's proponent, however, looks at that gap and says, "I don't know, therefore I know it's God." They slap a divine label on the mystery, and the inquiry stops. It is the end of curiosity, not the beginning of wisdom. The truth religion won't tell us that their God is no longer the grand explanation for the world we see, but a fugitive forever on the run from the advancing light of human knowledge. It's a babble of beliefs. If a single universal God wanted to communicate this one true message to all of humanity, what would we expect to see? We'd expect to see a single, consistent, and universally accessible revelation, a message so clear and compelling that it would, over time, converge and unite humanity under a common understanding of the divine. Now look at the world around us. What do you actually see? We see the exact opposite. We see a chaotic, cacophonous marketplace of thousands upon thousands of mutually exclusive religions, denominations, and sects, each one vehemently claiming to be the one and true only holder of absolute truth. The Christian God Yahweh is a trinity. The Muslim God Allah is a strict unity, and to suggest he is a trinity is the greatest of all sins. For a Hindu, divinity can be expressed in millions of forms, or as a single impersonal reality called Brahman. A Buddhist might tell you the very question of a creator God is irrelevant to the path of enlightenment. A Sikh believes in Ik Onkar and one supreme reality. A Zoroastrian places their faith in a cosmic battle between Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu. Scientologists believe humans are immortal spiritual beings called Thetans who have lived countless past lives. They believe trauma from these past lives creates engrams that cause negative behaviours and can be cleared through a process called auditing. They also believe that Tom Cruise is a powerful minister with endless knowledge and wisdom. These are not minor disagreements over liturgical details. These are fundamental, irreconcilable contradictions about the very nature of God and reality. They simply all cannot be correct. Logically, if one of them is correct, all the others must be wrong. And what does it mean if, say, Southern Baptist Christianity is the one and only truth? It means God has allowed over 80% of the world's population, including billions of sincere Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, and Jews, to be tragically and damnably mistaken. It is a communication plan with a failure rate that would get any mortal manager fired on the spot. The most damning piece of evidence in this regard is the simple fact of the accident of birth. The single greatest predictor of a person's religious belief is not existence, not reason or spiritual seeking, but it's the longitude and latitude of their birthplace. If you were born in Pakistan, for example, the odds are overwhelming that you will be a Muslim. If you were born in the Republic of Ireland, you will most likely be a Catholic. If you were born in Thailand, a Buddhist. In Utah, a Mormon. In India, a Hindu. In Hollywood, a Scientologist. So are we to believe that God, in his infinite wisdom, decided that your eternal salvation should be determined by a cosmic lottery of geography? That your access to the one capital truth depends on the faith of your parents? This makes no sense from the perspective of a universal loving God, but it makes perfect sense if we understand religion for what it clearly is: a cultural phenomenon, a system of beliefs, myths, and rituals passed down from one generation to the next, evolving and diverging over time, just like language, art, and music. Religion is not a divine revelation, it is a human invention. The truth that religion won't tell you is that your deeply held sacred beliefs are, in all likelihood, a product of your culture, not a message from the cosmos. Religion is an invention of control, not love or divinity. So, we stand at a crossroads. We've examined the evidence. We've seen a universe filled with pointless suffering, a God who remains stubbornly hidden, a faith that retreats into the gaps, and a world fractured by thousands of competing truths. What is the most rational conclusion that we can draw from all of this? Here we can employ one of the most powerful tools in the skeptic's toolkit. That is the principle of parsimony, more famously known as Occam's razor. The principle states that when faced with competing explanations for the same phenomenon, we should prefer the one that is simpler, the one that makes the fewest assumptions. So let's apply it here. We have two competing hypotheses to explain the universe as we find it. Hypothesis 1 is the theistic hypothesis. It posits that the universe and everything in it was created by and is possibly sustained by a supernatural being. This being is typically described as a non-physical, timeless, all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good personal mind. This mind exists outside of space and time, yet can interact with our world. This explanation requires us to assume the existence of an entirely new supernatural realm and a being whose properties are not only unproven, but are arguably logically incoherent. It doesn't actually explain the complexity of the universe. It just punts the problem up a level to an even greater, more inexplicable complexity. This being can perform magic, miracles, and feats of great wonder, although chooses to do so rarely and when there are little or very few witnesses. Hypothesis 2 is the naturalistic hypothesis. It posits that the universe we observe is all there is. It operates according to consistent, impersonal physical laws. Complexity, including life and consciousness, arises from simple components over immense periods of time, through emergent processes. This hypothesis makes no assumptions about supernatural realms or invisible beings. It works only with the evidence that we have. While it has unanswered questions, such as the ultimate origin of the physical laws themselves, it does not invent a complex, magical answer and pretend it's a solution. It simply acknowledges the limits of our current knowledge and keeps looking. Which of these two hypotheses is the simpler explanation in your opinion? It's not even a contest in my view. The naturalistic hypothesis is vastly more parsimonious. It doesn't multiply entities beyond necessity. The God hypothesis, on the other hand, is the ultimate violation of Occam's razor. It's the most complex and extravagant assumption that one could possibly make. It's an explanation that is infinitely more complex than the thing that it seeks to explain. So, Jamie, why doesn't God exist? Well, because a universe with a good and powerful God would not be saturated with gratuitous, agonizing suffering. Because a God who desires a relationship with us would not hide behind ambiguity and silence. Because the claims of religion have been systematically replaced by the verifiable truths of science, forcing God into an ever-shrinking corner of our ignorance. And because the sheer variety of conflicting religions points to a human origin, not a divine one. And because ultimately the idea of God is a needlessly complex hypothesis for a universe that can be much more simply explained without it. Stepping away from the God illusion can be frightening. It means accepting that we are alone in a vast, indifferent cosmos. It means acknowledging that justice is a human concept, not a cosmic guarantee. But it can also be profoundly liberating. It means that we are free. Free to create our own meaning. Free to build our own morality based on empathy and reason. Free to appreciate the staggering beauty and terrifying contingency of our one precious life, without the need for supernatural fairy tales. This is the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. It is a world without a celestial Father watching over us. And it is in this world, the real world, that we must live and strive and find our purpose. You see, from the moment that human beings opened their eyes to the world, they were surrounded by mystery, the thunder in the sky, the flicker of lightning, the warmth of the sun and the silence of death. They had questions, sure, but no answers. They saw the power of nature and felt small in front of it. They wanted meaning. They wanted control. And above all else, they wanted comfort. And that is how religion began. Not from divine revelation, but from simple human imagination. Religion did not fall from the sky. It was built slowly by ordinary people trying to make sense of an extraordinary world. It carries human fears, human desires, and human flaws. There is, quite simply, nothing divine about it. It is a human product shaped by culture, geography, politics, and psychology. It is a rulebook for life, morality, order, and control. Religion was born out of human fear, shaped by culture, reinforced by politics, and protected by tradition. It grew from our ignorance, but it survived through the centuries because it offers comfort. Nothing more, nothing less. You see, why would a loving and perfect God care more about belief than behavior? Why would eternal torture be the penalty for doubt when doubt comes from honest thinking? Only humans would design such a cruel system, because humans wanted to discourage questioning, and ultimately to discourage the control enforced over them. I completely respect those who choose to follow a god or religion. I respect their beliefs, and I admit that I am nobody. I do not claim to have answers for everything. But my comments in this episode here tonight are simply the answers to my own research and my own thinking. I'm sure you have your own. This episode has been heavy, so I'll leave you now on a lighter note. I'll leave you with a man who can sum up religion better than I, who can communicate his thoughts and feelings with greater clarity and bombast than I can ever aspire to achieve. This is the great George Carlin on religion.
Because I got to tell you the truth, folks. I got to tell you the truth. When it comes to bullshit, big time, major league bullshit, you have to stand in awe of the all-time champion of false promises and exaggerated claims, religion. No contest. No contest. Religion easily has the greatest bullshit story ever told. Think about it. Religion has actually convinced people that there's an invisible man living in the sky who watches everything you do every minute of every day. And the invisible man has a special list of 10 things he does not want you to do. And if you do any of these 10 things, he has a special place full of fire and smoke and burning and torture and anguish where he will send you to live and suffer and burn and choke and scream and cry forever and ever till the end of time. But he loves you. He loves you and he needs money. He always needs money. He's all powerful, all perfect, all knowing, and all wise. Somehow, just can't handle money. Religion takes in billions of dollars, they pay no taxes, and they always need a little more. Now, you talk about a good bullshit story. Holy shit.
I'd like to thank my friend Elliot for allowing me to use part of his message in introducing the subject of tonight's episode. If you would like to listen to the AI episode that triggered his question, and many more exclusive episodes, then head over to our Patreon at www.patreon.com/deadsouls. It's just $2 to sign up, and for that you get exclusive episodes, research articles, blog posts, and the opportunity to interact with my team and I directly. Good night, everyone.